Hey, Orion here. I've been podcasting for over 4 years now. 4 years. I started a bit unsure and insecure, but I am so much better and I'm a different woman today. I learned and grew so much. I grew as a person and I grew as a podcast host. And I had the privilege of talking with incredible people I never even imagined I can even reach. But regardless of how famous or not famous my guest is, sometimes you have a special conversation. One that is so stellar, you remember it even 4 years later. Welcome to Stellar Conversations. This is one of my absolute favorite episodes, and it will light up your day.
Welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. Get inspired and live out loud. From love, freedom, and success to having it all. Here's your host, coach, speaker, and shining star, Orion.
Roger, you're looking good.
Hello and welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. I'm your host, Orion, and I can't even contain myself. Today's guest is unfreaking believable. She is a world-renowned leadership coach, inspirational speaker, author, and master trainer. She's got 20 years coaching the top levels in the corporate world. And mostly she has an insane, shocking, heart-wrenching life story that made her the amazing person that she is. And you will learn how to not listen to that annoying little voice, that inner critic that is sometimes running your life, sometimes running your relationships, and sometimes running your businesses. And you will learn how to step into leadership and feel inspired and empowered and change your life forever. So I'm super excited to introduce to you Sally Anderson.
2, 1, 0.
Hey, Sally, and welcome. I'm so happy to be talking to you today. I'm very excited.
Privileged to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Let's start by you telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, what do you do, and how you help the world.
Sure. So I'm from New Zealand, one of the most amazing places on the planet.
It is,
Bit
for
biased,
sure.
obviously. So yeah, I was brought up in New Zealand, and my father was a guidance counsellor. He was somebody who was very passionate about kids who weren't academically minded and was very frustrated with the schooling system. So he packed up 4 kids, I'm the youngest, and took us to Canada. We lived there for 4 years, and the drug scene in Canada at the time was quite prolific. So my father brought us all back to New Zealand. So I arrived back in New Zealand. I was a redhead, white, freckles, Canadian accent, didn't look the same, sound the same, think the same. And so my earliest memory was that I didn't fit, but I had an idyllic upbringing in New Zealand. And I found a passion for skiing when I was younger and learnt to ski in Whistler Mountain. So when I came back to New Zealand, I decided to join the local ski club. And in the early 80s, I'm now 52, turning 52 this year. In the early 80s, a lot of people used to hitchhike. I'll give you the chronological order. And we were quite rebellious, and I got my first job hiring out skis at National Park in New Zealand, which is a local ski resort. Hitchhiked into town with a girlfriend and myself, and we were none the wiser. I was 15 years of age, and we went into the local bar, hung out with the locals. It was a bit rebellious. And what we didn't realize at the time was that we were being cased out by a notorious gang here in New Zealand called the Mongrel mob. And cutting a very long story short, I experienced something that nobody survives and was abducted over a 2-day period and gang raped by more than 100 Mongrel mob members and literally died in that experience.
Oh, wow.
However, I was conscious throughout the ordeal, and fast forward, when I was found, there was no support. And my parents didn't know how to deal with what had happened. So it was go back to school, act like it didn't happen. So to this day, my family has never acknowledged what happened. Nobody in the New Zealand society have acknowledged the severity of what occurred. So I lived into a 25-year journey of utter dysfunction on every level to the extreme, and the level of severance and disassociation because life wasn't safe. And so I have an integral understanding of every level of dysfunction, having lived it real time, now realizing that that was my apprenticeship for what I do today. So I can now acknowledge the Mongrel mob as my spiritual initiators, and having come full circle to achieve a level of self-actualization and full reintegration, that I had to experience the nuances of that 25-year lost year journey to be able to have an integral understanding of those that I sit in front of. So the education that I have developed off the back of being a course junkie for a good 30 years, name a book, a CD, a course, I've read it, listened to it, and been to it, because it wasn't for me a 2-3 day event. It was a 30-year life sentence, and I did that to myself. Self-loathing, self-hatred, addictions on every level. So it was like a PhD in dysfunction. I got my doctorate in victim, doctorate in martyrdom, doctorate in sabotage, and did it very, very well to the extreme. So I'm an extremist. So I corporately excelled. So I did a number of years in the hospitality game. I was very ambitious because it was all about control, not that I really knew that at the time. So my last assignment was based in the Netherlands, Boston, and New York. I was in charge. My background's in belief, behavioral, cultural change. So cultural change really is my genre. Going into large organizations, I understand people and culture and implementing cultural change initiatives. So that was 15 years ago, 3,000 projects at the height of the assignment, accountable for Netherlands, Boston, New York locations. Loved what I did, but I knew that the millions of dollars that they were spending, that they'd never get a return on their investment. So I became fascinated about this elusive thing called sustainability, both at a corporate level as well as a personal level, because I was a course junkie. I'd become so highly aware and highly trained, but I was unable to sustain it. I'd get that shot of euphoria, short-lived.
Yeah. As a seminar junkie myself, I can identify.
Well, the education that I've developed is, and we can claim being the first leadership service provider globally that is focusing on the sustainability element of personal or professional transformation. So that's our focus, and our intention this year is to really tip profile. We believe that it's a bit like a chess game, the pieces need to be put in place before we can go checkmate. So I'm very passionate about stopping people hurting permanently, and believe that the education that I've developed has that ability. And obviously from a leadership perspective, it is a leader's responsibility to leave a legacy. And so I believe that I survived what I did to be able to teach people to fulfill on the legacy of why they're here. And that is my sole purpose of why I'm alive and doing what I'm doing.
That's beautiful. So when I first approached you to come on the show, I did not know anything about your backstory. And then, like I do with all my guests, I researched you and I found out about that traumatic experience, and I saw a documentary, and I couldn't sleep the whole night that night. I was thinking about you, what you experienced. It really affected me in an empowering way. Not in like, oh, I'm so sorry for her. Because I understand, having been through some harsh times, not to compare it. Everybody has their own thing, and there's nothing like I never experienced anything like what you did. But I understand the power of forgiveness and the power of healing that self-inflicting pain that we take ourselves through by healing the people that hurt us. But that was like so powerful. I was thinking like, what something like that can do to a woman's identity as a woman, and what did it do to you? Like, how did you interacted with men after that? How did you interacted with yourself and your body after that?
Oh, there's a lot in that.
I know. I have so much to ask you.
So I lived because I was so disgusted by what happened to my body, and to survive what I did, I had to separate out. So there was kind of like me and then my body. And so for many decades, I always struggled with weight. I just didn't dislike myself. It was maggots wouldn't come close to the level of revulsion that I felt.
Wow. This is a friendly reminder for you to visit www.stellarlifepodcast.com for show notes and information about this awesome show. Check out our Facebook group, Stellar Life. Sorry, boys, this is for women only. And get all the information, including a checklist full of tips from the show, at www.stellarlifepodcast.com. And if you're enjoying yourself, please subscribe and review. And now, back to the show.
How that played out was, obviously a lot of abuse. I became a sex addict for over 2 decades, so always putting myself at risk, always validating that I wasn't good enough. I would, because of the depth of my voice, added to the revulsions. So 99.9% of the time on the phone, I'm still taken as Mr. Anderson. For a good 10 years of my life, I would be asked whether I was a man or a woman, like, what are you? Like you're some freak show.
And what you've been through is what triggered your voice.
Yeah, so I received so much oral abuse that it damaged my vocal cords. And so every time I spoke, it was a reminder, A, of my past, and B, because of the level of masculine energy that I would portray, because it just wasn't safe to be a woman.
Absolutely, yes.
And so, just wearing a dress doesn't really cut it, So, but again, all of those experiences were imperfection for what I now teach, having understood it, because even to this day, to be asked, my husband will get on the phone and they'll think that it's me, If you hadn't have done the work, you'd know that would hotkey you back into your, self-belief. With reference to, so relationships are very, I lived for many years saying that I was committed to being in a loving, intimate, committed relationship. And if that was the case, I lived always alone because I had to sabotage anything good, because who would want a woman like me?
My God.
Body sculpturing, I went years and years and years of weight complaint, and then had Corey Everson on my fridge for about 8 years, who was one of the forerunners in bodybuilding for women. And I never ever thought that I could ever achieve that, and it was like purgatory having her on my fridge. However, when I was in Boston, actually, when Body for Life first came out, Bill Phillips' program, having done every dietitian, nutritionalist plan, every fad diet, you name it, and meanwhile, tens of thousands of dollars later, because I had to validate that I could not lose weight and that I was ugly and fat and all the rest of it. And it was relative. It's like even with my story, people say that they always do comparison. And I say, look, in 15 years specifically in this game, those that have experienced next to nothing are more dysfunctional than those that are warranted to. That psychologically fascinates the hell out of me. You can have somebody who's had their cat die versus somebody who's had their parents murdered. Guess who's more dysfunctional? It's not about the happening, it's what you do with the happening.
Right.
So I ended up doing body sculpting. I got down to 4%, 57 kg.
That's insane.
Unbelievable.
That's insane. 4% body fat? What?
Yeah.
What did you eat, air?
Well, in that game, you're eating about 6 meals a day, so it's crazy.
Yeah.
But that whole journey, what I learnt was my relationship with my spoken word. Because transformation, most people complicate the hell out of it. It is very simplistic. And a lot of it has to do with your integrity with your word. And most people's relationship with their spoken word is lousy.
Oh, that's a big point. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So being one's word is integral to experiencing the level of transformation that you want. Most people are so disassociated, disconnected from their core. So I coach to cause, not symptom. Most people are focusing on the symptoms, which is why they keep reoccurring, versus when you're looking at something from a sustainability standpoint, you're wanting to understand what's actually causing these symptoms to be so cyclical. So I talk about want versus commitment a lot. And there's 4 areas that most people want to transform as a generalization. One is money, one is love, one is vocation, calling, purpose, legacy, that type of area. And the 4th is weight and well-being. So from a reality check standpoint, when I'm in a room full of people, I'll say, who in the room is still wanting to lose weight, or who's wanting to transform their finances? And then I'll ask the question, in the last 2, 5, or 10 years, how many of you have achieved either weight loss sustainably or transforming your financial arena? Hands go up. You probably live in a conversation that you hate it, you dislike it, you feel frustrated there. And I'm here to tell you today that you actually love it. You love being fat and you love your finances being in the state that they're in because that validates your default identity about yourself. So what I specialize in is this thing called the default identity, this disempowered aspect of ourselves that we adopted at a young age, and then we've found evidence for decades to validate it. But it was never the truth. It was just what the child decided. So getting back to the original question around want versus commitment, people will go to course to course to course, book to book to book, CD to CD to CD. They're looking outside of themselves for the elusive answer versus unearthing at a causal level, what is it that is having me pretty much, because most human beings are saboteurs, having me ongoingly sabotage. Because if there's an area of your life that's not where you want it to be, it's exactly where you want it to be from the default perspective because it's validating that level of positioning.
Mm-hmm. Super powerful. So what happened to you emotionally when you were on the stages competing in bodybuilding, getting to 4% body fat, having this shield of muscles to protect you or show the world or whatever the reason was? What did it do to you internally, and why wasn't this sustainable for you?
I spent so much time, because beliefs run everything. So first of all, I never believed that I could achieve it. So even when I achieved it, I look back at the photography and go, it's really sad because I was in a 10 body. I looked the best I've ever looked in my entire life. And I was still running a very hardcore tape around self-revulsion, self-loathing. And so I never, ever achieved the level of satisfaction, even though the physical manifestation was there. And I work with a lot of millionaires and billionaires who are dissatisfied. So I believe the biggest addiction on the planet is dissatisfaction.
Wow. Powerful.
Yeah, people who've got everything are still dissatisfied. People who want what they think that they have, thinking that when they get there, they're going to be happier, they too are dissatisfied. So there's something in the human psyche that I believe people aren't addressing around achieving achievement or attaining a goal, thinking that that is the thing that's then going to make you happier. We live in a world of this isn't it yet, there's somewhere else to get. When I get there, I'm going to be happy then in that place called there. How you going? I'm getting there. Where is that place called there? There's only the now moment and you're never here.
Mm-hmm.
So the body sculpting is a really great example for me. I thought that if I transformed my body and that I had it looking like a 10, then it would deal with everything. It didn't, because I hadn't healed. So, forgiving one's past and the healing side of things, I've seen every modality known to man. I have searched the planet for the best of the best, and pleased to say that years and years and years of experiencing a cross-section of modalities. And the reason why I did that wasn't so much, I was a suicidal maniac for over 2 decades. So I would do anything, as people were getting married, having mortgages, having kids, doing the normal thing. I was dealing with my psychological state 24/7, living out of 24/7 anxiety attacks. I understand fear. I understand that dysfunction, yet the irony. In my first book, Free for Living Life Beyond the Edge, one of the chapters in the book is that I don't believe in depression. And that whole area for me, in my stand for wanting to transform counseling and psychotherapy, that as we evolve, which is part of Evolve Leadership's philosophy, there is a need to introduce new ways of people being able to achieve the end result without it being drug-related.
Yeah, because if you keep doing what you've done, you keep getting what you've got. And my question is, do you think that forgiveness is the first step? Do you think forgiving yourself and others is the first step to healing?
No. Getting present to the costs of the carnage you're creating would probably be the first step, because to associate would mean that you'd have to take responsibility for the hell that you're putting yourself through. I have a very unique take on forgiveness. I believe, and I've done a lot of research in this area, where a lot of people are focused on the happening or the perpetrator, which is why they genuinely cannot experience the level of forgiveness to give them the freedom that they need. And there's a difference between analytical forgiveness versus experiential forgiveness, where you can talk that you've forgiven and talk that you've overcome it, but it's not genuine. Versus experientially is where you know that you've done the work because it doesn't impact you anymore.
And how do you experience that?
Yeah, so my take is, for myself, I had an event and then I then added a few decades of carnage. So the focus needed to be on 10% the incident or the perpetrators, 90% yourself for what you do to yourself. So when you get present to you become your own worst perpetrator, that is what you need to forgive. The only person who loses out of the inability to forgive is the person who can't forgive. So I've done 2 60-minute documentaries. The first one was the highest rated 60-minute documentary in the history of 60 Minutes New Zealand. Won the Humanitarian Award that same year, where I came face to face with one of my perpetrators.
Yeah, I saw that. It was a super intense moment, and you were sitting there and you looked at him and you smiled and you told him that you forgave him or them, because you don't really know who did and what did they do to you. But he was just one of the gang members that were an active participant in those rapes and gang rapes and horrible acts. And then you gave him a hug.
The 60-minute interviewer was absolutely livid because when she was interviewing him, murders, gang rapes, that type of world was his norm. And it was like, how many cups of coffee have you had this week?
Yeah.
And she asked, actually, after the interview, how can you forgive? I go, I had a 2-3 day event and then I added a good 20, 30 years. That was my life sentence. I don't even think about the Mongrel mob. It's got nothing to do with them. The reason why I'm forgiving is because I had to forgive myself to release myself. That, to me, the breakthrough in the work that I do is when you can have a breakthrough with forgiving yourself for what you've done to yourself, because the Mongrel mob didn't do that to me. I did that to myself. Mm-hmm. There was the event, yeah. And then the carnage that I created, and I literally became worse than the Mongrel mob to myself. So the journey home, as it were, with reference to healing, I believe starts and ends with getting present to the cost of being your own worst perpetrator.
And how do you do that? How do you get present to that cost?
Well, part of the work that we do and also the healers that we align with, healing in isolation is not sustainable. Coaching in isolation is not sustainable. My key focus is not just short-term shot of euphoria, feel great, and then go back into same old, same old. My aim from a planetary standpoint is being able to give back what I've learned around how do you sustain change personally and or professionally. And I believe that is a function of understanding integrally your default identity, which is the work that we specialize in. When you understand the nuances of that, why do you create carnage? Why do you sabotage yourself? Why do you have an inability to forgive? Why? And you can understand where it's come from. So just to give you a taste of that, in the study of ontology, the study of what it is to be human, they distinguished that there were incidences in childhood of a negative nature where you decided something. Mm-hmm. And it pretty much is a life sentence. Now, most people are unconscious to a lot of that programming, and then they live unconsciously to creating and validating those stories and beliefs about themselves that have no validity but the validity to which the child gave. And yet, same thing with relationship. Dysfunctionality in relationship is that we have unhealed little boys, unhealed little girls in relationship. Same with running businesses. We have unhealed little girls, little boys running businesses, because healing is not something that is widely endorsed, and it has a bit of a negative connotation in the market. I mean, we as a leadership service provider championing, saying that we are, the leading advocates of healing and coaching together to get full reintegration. It's very controversial in the leadership space to talk about healing. And that's part of my second book, The Co-Creative Age, where I talk about love and faith are the only two things that matter with reference to the human condition. Yet every single organization on the planet has human beings in it, and the last thing in business that we talk about is love and faith.
Yeah, it's It's too much. It's too much woo-woo.
And that's where they get to abdicate responsibility, relinquish responsibility. So part of the co-creative age, the next evolutionary phase in leadership, is they need to be the two primary strategies in your business. If you're going to evolve to the next level as a human being, let alone a company, we need to be associated to the things that matter. No longer can we discard because it's either I don't believe it or I don't trust it or it is too woo-woo or too esoteric. I specialize in being able to have conversations at a corporate level with leaders. If you listen to people that they can handle a conversation, they'll handle it. If you listen to people that they can't, they won't. And to me, I'm on a bit of a mission to get people connected, because until they get connected, they can't experience what it is to forgive or what it is to be able to reclaim their power in any area of their life.
Right. So you started with awareness and finding your wounded inner child, or in your case, teenager and inner child. And you created an awareness and a big enough why to change the course of your life, to change the way you relate to yourself and to your body. So some people still have the awareness of why they do the things they do and they keep sabotaging. What's the next step?
Well, the power of awareness-based training is that you've got a choice. You've got a choice on how you feel. You've got a choice on what you do. You've got a choice on how you react. You've always got a choice. Most people enjoy being a victim, and that can last for a very long period of time. The people that our education attracts, they have done everything. They've done the Anthony Robbins, the avatars, the landmarks. They've done every professional leadership program. But for whatever reason, they haven't experienced the transformation that they've wanted, nor have they known how to sustain it. So the danger of awareness-based training is, at least when you're not aware, you can get away with your dysfunction. But when you become aware and then you still choose to play out that dysfunction, then that, again, just keeps validating where your commitment lies.
Goes back to your word.
Yeah, and that's where commitment equals results. Wherever the results are being produced as a function of your current commitment, even just that statement in itself can really rally people. They'll be justifying, you don't know what I've tried and all the rest. I go, well, have you produced the results?
You don't know what I've been through.
Yeah. Milk that puppy. If there's an area of your life that you are not satisfied with, it's exactly where you want it to be, because you're the designer of your life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people often ask me, now that I'm married and been married 7 years, been together 8 years, I never had physical children because I was just in utter dysfunction for those 2-decade period. But I birth a lot of things on a regular basis, and my husband calls me kind of like the mother of birthing things with people.
He looks like a very sweet person. He adores you.
He's an extraordinary man.
Yeah.
But again, he chose me off a 60-minute documentary. So, it's a bit weird when people ask you, how did you meet your partner? He chose me. He watched the documentary, and that whole story is probably could easily fill an hour in itself. But my point is a very dysfunctional background. I believe that the universe puts people together for a reason, and he, of his own admission, knows that he'd either be in prison or dead had he not have met me.
Wow.
And yeah, I've never met such a strong man for a very strong woman. Because the one thing about surviving, and that's relative for people, and earlier I was speaking about those that have experienced trauma are unable to reconcile what happened when nobody in society really wants to hear it. Who really wants to listen to rape or incest or, wife beatings or, whatever that aspect of our society people don't want to hear. Yet the irony is we have a drug-related industry globally that we put a label on it and then we'll drug it, and then that's our way of being able to deal with. So at a level, I believe that it's like the weight loss industry. It's $1 trillion industry. It is not interested in sustainable solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I do feel a bit like a Mike Moore with reference to wanting this education to be in the hands of anybody working with the human condition. If you take a psychiatrist or a counselor as an example, who have had years and years and years of formalized training, and the controversy in the work that I do is that, to me, to be able to shift somebody out of a state of where they're operating, you need to go toe-to-toe with that person. You need to bring of your own personal life experiences. Whereas in counseling and psychotherapy, you're not allowed to share anything of a personal nature. And until you, the practitioner, have an integral understanding of your own default identity, to be able to facilitate somebody else's default identity, you've had to have done the work on yourself to that degree. In my observation, there are a lot of unhealed people trying to heal unhealed people.
Uh-oh, that's a problem. That's a big problem.
Yeah. So wanting to, if stopping people hurting permanently is the essence of the education, and wanting to anybody working with the human condition, if they were to do the work on themselves to be able to have this as a toolkit and as an adjunct over and above their formal training, would be able to reach more people with being able to heal the planet,
Mm-hmm. So for you, Sally, you created the awareness. What was the moment where you knew that you are healed and you started to build different relationships to your body?
I often get asked, because I do a lot of professional keynote speaking, and people often ask, what was the point of change? What changed everything? And my brother died when he was 23 years of age. I was 18. And when I witnessed what my parents went through, having lost a son, the only reason in my 20, 30 years of carnage, the reason I didn't commit suicide was because of my brother. And the irony was he was actually my savior, as much as I cursed him. So the journey to what changed, I was in a course, I was suicidal, I'd had enough, I was highly freaking trained in God knows how many people's curriculums, but I was still dying inside.
Mm.
And the course leader got me up on stage in front of 300 people, and I was the queen of drama in those days. And he called me a victim. And in my world, victim meant weakness. And of all of the things that I thought about myself, one thing I knew was that I wasn't weak. And so that didn't compute. But when he made the distinction that victim is powerless to change the situation, it was like a ticker tape parade throughout my entire life, that I was completely and utterly powerless in every area of my life because I thought life was doing it to me.
Mm.
And then I landed the distinction choice. And in that moment, my life changed. So that was when I was 30. I'm now going on 52. I never realized I had a choice. I didn't realize that I had a choice on how I felt, a choice on how I reacted, a choice on what I did, a choice on what I thought. That was a new concept for me, and pretty much became a vigilante from that moment. But it was a defining moment where everything changed, because if I had a choice then and never realized that what I was, how many books do we need to read that say, be careful what you think, your thoughts create your reality? But we adults are not disciplined in where our thoughts are focused. If you're spending time worrying, you will attract that which you're worried about. If you're spending time fearful, you will attract, what you're fearful of. We are so powerful. We can read it, we can listen to it, and all the rest of it. But in the application piece, which is where the default comes in, the default being the disempowered aspect of self that needs to keep you safe, albeit how dysfunctional it is. The default identity is about safety, because when I walk down the street, I see people shut off at a heart level and at a connectedness level. And part of what I teach people is, regardless of what you call it, higher power, universal force, collective consciousness, God, if you've ever tried to vacuum, have you tried to vacuum when you haven't plugged it in and turned it on? It's a bit tricky,
It's a good metaphor.
Who we are in our human form is limited, but who we are in our co-creative form is limitless. So teaching people to tap in, teach me, show me, guide me. If you have your faith, you have everything, whatever that is for you.
Yeah, for sure. What did you do? What actions did you take? What new thoughts did you think to relate differently to your body and fall in love with her?
Well, definitely the journey around the body side of things, even though I maintained, sustained post-competition. I did a video blog recently on it, that when you think about, I'll just talk about women's dysfunction, about weight just for a moment.
Yeah, let's do.
Most women are in a resist-persist cycle of some level of hatred, varying degrees, and dissatisfaction around their bodies. Whereas I believe that weight, which isn't a foreign concept, weight is all about protection. But if we do reverse psychology with it, when was the last time you got down on your knees and you actually thanked whomever your interpretation of your faith is? In this particular conversation, we'll call it the universe. When was the last time you got down on your knees and you actually thanked the universe for protecting you? Thank you for putting the weight on. Thank you for, it's complete reverse psychology. So my breakthrough with my body was when I realized that there was a higher force at work in my life, and that if we are to believe that weight is about protection, and that the universe supported me by putting the weight on, and that until I was ready to let go of the weight and reintegrate, reconcile, heal, come home, then the weight could go because it was no longer required. Because there's not enough teaching around the empathetic aspect of weight, and then we have an industry that now then fuels the resist-persist cycle around it, is half the reason why people can't sustain it. So the falling in love with yourself is falling in love with yourself unconditionally.
Mm-hmm.
So when I met my husband and I got married, most women lose weight when they get married. I put on 25 kg. The irony was I was the happiest I've ever been because I was understanding what was going on, that I no longer needed an external mechanism to keep myself safe, that if I'd done the healing, I'd done the work, I was able to no longer have it as a protective mechanism. As far as learning the self-talk, part of my mission also is to have mastery of the inner critic in the schooling system. So to be human is to have an inner critic, that internal voice that beats the crap out of you. The irony, to be human is to have one. It annihilates human potential, but nobody's talking about it. Of all of the research that I've done into the inner critic, there are many mechanisms on how to manage it, coordinate yourself around it. There's even books out there that tells you to wear a rubber band and flick yourself every time your inner critic's going off. If that is not an example of absolute sabotage, so part of what we do with reference to mastering the inner critic is, can you imagine that in the schooling system? I can talk to a 9-year-old child who's got the worst inner critic on the planet, and then I can talk to somebody who's 49 years of age who's had their inner critic beat the crap out of them for 4 decades. Mastery of the inner critic needs to be in the schooling system as much as maths and science and all of the mainstream subjects, because it's the thing that actually has people be so dysfunctional with themselves. It's at the core of every human being on the planet. We don't talk about it at a leadership level, and we need to.
Mm-hmm. So what's your take on dealing with the inner critic?
Again, a lot of my practices are very unorthodox. And so part of conversations that I facilitate with people around the inner critic has a lot to do with the unique work that we do around the default identity. So I'll tell you one angle. So when I talk to somebody about their inner critic, again, I'm just framing it as unorthodox, I'll ask them, are you a child abuser? Not the average conversation that you'd have with a client. They obviously come back with no. I go, okay, good. If there was a 5-year-old child standing beside you right now, would you berate that child the way you berate yourself most days? Oh, God, no. I go, okay, good. I'm going to go back. Are you a child abuser? What on earth have you done? Think about yourself about the age of 3 to 5. What have you done that has deserved decades of self-beration? What did you do that warrants that?
Mm-hmm.
To get somebody present, so to have somebody acknowledge that they actually are a child abuser to themselves, they have abused the shit out of their own inner child for decades, unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in results. I'll do whatever I need to get results in a really sparse bit, because most people have spent a hell of a lot of money on change. They've done the courses, they've done the books, and they just want change. So it ain't going to happen by me wussy-wussing around the backyard. Intentionality at a causal level, having people wake up to the damage that they're doing to themselves. So the irony of awareness-based training, I have been an abuser of my own inner child for decades, and until I am able to get present to the cost of that, I can't take my power back. And when your inner critic, say the inner critic says, who do you think you are? A, you're in reaction to that. You're disconnected. Why do you automatically believe it's the truth? Have certain processes that are able to collapse it, because every single inner critic conversation is a function of being disconnected, feeding a projection. You're either out in the past, feeding a belief that you created, or you're out in the future, validating a belief that you have about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You live in that, the past and future-based projections are the culmination of what your inner critic says to you, but you're disconnected. And until you connect and reconnect to what motivates you, get present to the cost, you've got a choice. You can either continue to sabotage, or you can continue to retrain your thought structures. So when people say to me, oh, Sally Anderson brainwashes people, I go, damn right. I reprogram people at a cerebral level, right, to have them reclaim, because your beliefs run everything. You know, you believe you can, you believe you can't, you can't.
Correct. And so you've been through the healing and you start finding self-love. And what about relationships? How did you learn to trust again and to open yourself to love in a way, in more of a feminine way, rather than a masculine that was running you that said, I don't want to get hurt ever again?
I've got every right to not trust a thing on the planet, considering my whole life apprenticeship has been betrayal from friends, betrayal from every business partner, betrayal from family, betrayal from, I understand betrayal. So the irony, what you're here to learn is what you're here to teach. So I'm here learning to trust, let go, and surrender, and that's what I teach. So every single experience I've had that could have had me be bitter, resentful, and I could have easily been a statistic in the system. My trajectory either would have been a mental asylum, suicide, or a statistic in the system. The fact that I've completely transformed my life, have transcended tens of thousands of people's lives, soon to be millions of lives.
Hooray! Congratulations.
Yeah, it makes sense as to why I do what I do and why I survived what I survived. So being able to teach people, have an understanding of, I believe we all have a different life contract. It's my only way of being able to understand why some people experience some things and others not. And that if we are to believe that we are here for a purpose and we're here for a reason, whether we learn those contractual lessons or not is another thing. I'm a true believer in psychosomatics, that whatever you manifest on the physical is what you're not dealing with on the emotional. So the journey around love specifically is that I, again, had a choice. I can either remain bitter and resentful, and Anthony Robbins talks about the 4 R's, where you experience rejection, you then feel repressed, you then feel resentful, and then you become resigned. Most people go to their graves resigned. So I learnt early on through many, many years of healing and pretty aggressive work that I could either live a life where I learnt from each experience and then was able to have it forward my game versus retract. So I live, and my mantra in life is think, do, say, be equals forwarding the game. Most people don't even know what their game is. So I've trained myself to a very high degree of integrity. Every single thing that I think, every single thing that I say, every single thing that I do, and everything that I'm being is congruent to forwarding my game, because I understand what my game is. Now, think about it on a day-to-day basis. How often is what you're thinking forwarding your game? Is what you're saying forwarding your game? What you're thinking forwarding your... It really has you look at how undisciplined we are with where our focus is. So learning to be loved, learning to love, to me was a bit like returning to my faith, because it fundamentally comes back to trust. If you don't trust, you can't have a relationship with yourself, let alone the universe or with another person. I also believe in timing. I had to experience 2 to 3 decades of being alone to a severe degree to understand, if I'm here to teach people to heal, to trust what it means to come home, then I need to understand the severity of extreme. So it's almost like every adverse experience had to happen for me to learn the opposite. The same with love. I had to understand hatred to an extreme to understand the power of love, which is to me the only thing that matters. So the how really was a function of choice. If you choose, it's a bit like when you see a train track, when I do work with youth, there's a train track, you change the train track 1 millisecond, not 1 millimeter, the whole trajectory of where that train's going to head is going to go in a different direction. We complicate transformation because if we were to make it easy, then we'd have to die to that default level of identity that's kept us safe. I'm not undermining how dysfunctional it's been, but it's a safety mechanism that most people are running that they have no idea of.
Yeah, I love everything that you're saying, and everything is just very much aligned with what I have learned from myself and from being a seminar junkie and from doing the healing work, shamanic work, whatever work I did. And I kind of feel like there is no goal. There is no end to how much we can evolve and get better and smarter and more spiritual and more connected to high power or the universal source, God, creator. For me, I understand that internal question that I had. My question was, how can I not get hurt? And I could not date people or have a relationship that lasted more than 2-3 months. 4 years ago, I went to Date with Destiny with Tony Robbins, and I learned that was the question that was running my life. And on that day, I sat by a little waterfall outside of the resort, and I had a breakdown, and I started crying and laughing and laughing and crying. It was a breakdown and breakthrough, and I was praying, and I was finally ready and willing to have faith and surrender and trust. I was just like, okay, I guess after experiencing the abusive relationship, I got myself really hard, and I studied martial arts, and I got really strong, and I became a kick-ass, and I was sabotaging every relationship that I was getting myself into. And at that night, it was 1 a.m. I was singing to the stars, started laughing, crying, laughing. And it was a full surrender. Not in a weak way. It was a powerful surrender. Letting go of control is power. And I was trying to control everything in my life at that point. And I wrote down my relationship vision. And 48 hours later, I met my husband. He proposed on a hot air balloon 9 days after we met. And I said no. And it was an awkward 20 minutes in a little basket in the sky. I had nowhere to go. But 9 months later, he proposed again at the same place. I prayed for him. And I said yes. So, yeah, and me too. Like, I understand the power of forgiveness. I had to forgive my ex, and I had to learn to forgive myself and journey into healing that wounded child. Even last Friday, I went to a thing called Inner Dance, where it's like a sound bath, but the instructor comes and she zaps you with healing energy. And I went on this astral travels into so many times in my life where I was in pain and I got hurt, and I just saw myself, the mature version of me, the present version of me, going there and telling her that I love her and everything's gonna be fine, and just sending her love more and more. It was beautiful and overwhelming at the same time. It was really nice.
Thank you for sharing. It's profound.
Yeah, it is. So you talk a lot about leadership. What is a leader to you, and how can we take a stand as a leader in this world?
One of the ways we describe, I think there's a level of frustration within leadership currently where a lot of leaders are highly trained. They have been to most of the traditional leadership teaching providers. We talk about a three-legged stool. So one leg of the stool is the traditional leadership. So they're highly trained in that area. Second leg of the stool is their subject matter expertise. Most leaders have honed their skills to a high degree and are exemplary in that area. Third leg of the stool, however, is more your soft skills, mindset skills, behavioral change. That usually fits into the bucket of when we've got the time, when we've got the budget, which is hardly ever, is the most deficit within leadership. So in my observation of where the planet's at, it's all very well to talk about what the issues are on the planet. However, if we don't have leaders who are evolving in their ability to lead, then that is a concern. So I said before, those that are, when you're in your human form, it's limited. When you're in your co-creative form, it's limitless. There is a lack of teaching at a leadership level to teach leaders on how to tap into the unknown. And the unknown dimension is what is to be, I believe, needs to be part of the core training within traditional leadership. We have a responsibility to impact future generations that aren't even born yet. If we are not, and I don't know why others aren't jumping up and down, but I certainly am, if we are not evolving the psyche of those who lead, we are. impacting future generations of those that haven't even been born yet. So I am on a bit of a mission to get my latest book out, which is speaking into all of that. And that because most leaders are trained in mainstream thinking and might entertain the odd, but it's not mainstream. So I believe there's a sense of urgency to deal with issues that are beyond the context of the human mind. We have to evolve the human mind. And that is not the acceptable norm, but it needs to be. So my frustration even in my own experience of cultural change, Sally, can you just come in and fix my people?
Sure. Let me just wave a magic wand and everything's going to be just cool.
First of all, I don't believe people need to be fixed, but and the fish stinks from the head down, unless the leader is willing to walk what they're advocating, you cannot expect your people to...
Yes. It all goes, yes. Let me be a little more excited about this concept.
So that's where evolved leadership came about, that I decided I would go nowhere near a company unless the CEO was willing to walk it as much as anybody else. So really specializing in high-level leaders, CEO, C-suite, board level, that's where I hang out, because half of them are little boys, little girls who are running major businesses, but they have not done enough work on their mindset. And I believe there needs to be far more focus within the leadership realm of evolving the thinking of those who lead.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So I want to be respectful of your time. Before we say goodbye for now, what are your 3 quick tips to living a stellar life? And where can people find you and learn from you and take your seminars and read your books?
3 things, man. I suppose number 1, it comes back to how many books have you read where it says, be careful what you think, your thoughts create your reality. If you do not have a very disciplined approach to what you think about, then you are a self-fulfilling prophecy on what it is that you achieve. So number 1, numero uno, is that beliefs run your life. So getting very disciplined in retraining your thought patterns is integral. Number 2, do whatever you can to form a new relationship with your spoken word. It has everything to do with transformation. If you're wanting to do anything in the area of transformation, absolutely transform your relationship with your spoken word, because most people's relationship with their spoken word is lousy. And probably the 3rd would be, I talk about a ludicrousy cycle, where you're either producing results or no results or same results. And, we keep cycling, and then that leaves us feeling in whatever operating state that is normally disempowering. So it's a ludicrousy cycle because we're not understanding at a causal level what's actually going on. And I call them relinquishment buckets. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I don't know how. I don't have enough energy. They're all relinquishment buckets, stock standard, relayed by a human being. How convenient you don't have time, money, energy, etc. It's never about that, but it's a convenient excuse. So confusion is always your abdication of taking responsibility. And if you are using any of those throwaway lines, then welcome to the world of being a professional saboteur. However, through the power of awareness-based training, you can actually take your power back. So just have a look at what ludicrousy cycle that you're in and know that you do have the ability to reclaim your power if you choose it. I could keep going, but I'll shut up there.
I could keep listening forever.
And as far as how do you find us, I release a free video every week. So there's about 30 episodes on Evolve Leadership TV on the website. If your listeners wanting to get more of a taste of the education, there's blogs on the website. There's a lot of free resources on the website. The website is www.evolvedleadership.com.au. We are in a process of major rebranding at the moment. The new website will be live in March. However, the website that's there has all the information on it. So www.evolvedleadership.com.au.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sally Anderson, for being a light worker and helping change the world and change the lives of millions of future leaders. And I love you. I appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the privilege of being able to share today, and thank you for trusting your intuition and making the original approach. So thank you.
Thank you for joining me on my mission to light people up and change lives around the world. I hope today's conversation inspires you to step up, go after the life of your dreams, and be who you want to be. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to go to stellarlifepodcast.com for show notes, transcripts, and other cool stuff. And please subscribe, review, and help spread the word by sharing us on Facebook and Twitter. Have a lovely day, and I'll catch you on the next episode.